So let's just quickly go back to the late 1970s. One of the things that's interesting about that period is that you had two upheavals in two neighboring states, Afghanistan and Iran. Both of them were anti-monarchist. In fact, the monarchy in Afghanistan had been overthrown in 1973. But the aftermath of that was well underway in 78, 79. In 78, there was a coup in Afghanistan as the government that had been edging away from Russia, from the Soviet Union, and trying to develop links with the West was overthrown effectively by the Communist Party. And so 78, 79 in Afghanistan, there was a socialist revolution underway, which was opposed by Islamic forces. In the same time, in Iran, there was an anti-monarchist revolution underway in which the socialist and Islamist forces came together in order to overthrow Iran. They overthrow the Shah of Iran. Those two forces, the socialist, secular, and the Islamist, represent what I call in the book the two radical waves of the Middle East. And it's the interaction between these two that I think has given so many of the crises in the Middle East their particular character and impact. The socialist revolution, one would have expected from the Cold War, would have been the most powerful and formidable in the 50s and 60s. And indeed in the Middle East, it was led by Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, with Pan-Arabism, secular in the politics, keeping the clerics in their place, never wholly communist, but forging close ties with the Soviet Union. He suppressed communist parties, but forged close ties with the Soviet Union. By the late 70s, the socialist revolution was almost running its course. They'd failed. They'd failed economically. They'd failed with Israel. The impact of the 67 war still lingered in that sense, the humiliation of the regular defeats at the hands of the Israelis. They failed because the Pan-Arab slogan that Nasser championed of unity amongst the Arab peoples, not the Islamic peoples, the Arab peoples, had brought disunity. Some of you, I suspect, are old enough to remember the United Arab Republic, which was an entity which was to bring Egypt and Syria together. It didn't last because it was always based on one state being stronger and lording it over the other, and it couldn't last. So that the Arab world, despite the rhetoric of unity, was divided amongst itself. Syria and Egypt, Syria and Iraq. Syria and Iraq both claim to be following Ba'ath ideology, which is sort of a mixture of socialism and fascism that had developed during the Second World War. You might have thought that they would be ideologically close and together, but they weren't. The ideological closeness, in fact, aggravated their differences rather than brought them together. And it's a point just to keep in mind when one's thinking about the Middle East more generally. It's a point that you could make about other parts of the world, indeed any radical groups. It goes back to what Freud called the narcissism of small differences, the tendency of radical groups to be far more aware of what divides them from each other than, in fact, what they argue about with their main enemy.